Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where today we're going to discuss women both in front of and behind the camera when it comes to blockbuster movies. Now, just a few years ago, this was a conversation we wouldn't be having, not only because this wasn't a possibility to have women both in front of and behind the camera with big action blockbusters, but because there wasn't a demand for it. But as blockbuster movies, particularly comic book films and fantasy films, etc., basically genre filmmaking, take over Hollywood and more women are a part of the audience, it's now becoming something that Hollywood's very interested in. And I also have to add, you have to give credit where credit is due. This wouldn't be possible if male audience members weren't becoming more into the idea of enjoying a film that featured a female talent in the lead role or behind the camera. And I think a lot of that has to do also with television, so I have to give some credit due there as well, where a lot of female talent is coming up both in front of and behind the camera as well, and proving that it can be done and that the stories aren't too girly. So now we're in a situation where we can fill pretty much an entire episode of Morning Movie News on the topic. But is that a good thing? I want to discuss a couple of instances about this, new situations that are coming to an end, and how sometimes it's maybe not the best idea, because as we've said many times, and you guys have said in the comments, which I agree with, you never want to have diversity for the sake of diversity. It should be about the storytelling and what's the best story, right? So the first thing we're going to focus on is Star Wars. Now this universe is being reintroduced to the movie-going audience after a very long hiatus, and a couple of prequels that we're all very divided on. Some people really enjoy them, some people not so much. But of course J.J. Abrams is seeing what he can do. They have a whole team assembled with Kathleen Kennedy, and George Lucas was crying over the weekend, saying, I think, quite continuing to show poor judgment, I think, on his behalf, going around telling everyone, well, they threw out my treatments for the new Star Wars film, so don't ask me about it. It's like, really? Do you have to bring that up, George? I mean, wasn't the whole point that you were going to be involved in these? But anyway, and also to his credit, he did create one of the first really strong female characters, Princess Leia, although she was reimagined by other talent, Lawrence Kasdan, etc., to be a little bit stronger as the original trilogy went on. But, she was always spunky to begin with. So anyway, the big news over the weekend that also broke about Star Wars was the spin-off film coming from Gareth Edwards. This is the director of Godzilla, and it was revealed that the lead for his spin-off films is going to be a woman, and there are several actresses already testing for the role. So we'll get into a moment about whether or not we should have another movie with a female lead, but let's just see how this is being handled first, right? So the actresses testing are Rooney Mara, which is weird because Rooney Mara is best known for being in the unsuccessful remake of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and also as the whitewashed Tiger Lily in the upcoming Pan film. So, I would be like, why would we want to hitch this to our wagon? But we'll see. Star Wars, of course, is the big sell here, and it can probably withstand any hit. But why make it take the hard hits? I think a much more interesting choice is Tatiana Maslany from Orphan Black. That's a very popular show on the BBC. I couldn't get into it. I tried because it's so popular, but she clearly has a very strong fan base and the same general demographic that you'd really want to hit hard with a Star Wars spin-off, especially one with a female lead. And then also Felicity Jones, who is Oscar nominated currently for The Theory of Everything. She is auditioning, and of course I don't think she's busy with her work on Spider-Man as Felicia Hardy, aka Black Cat. Who even knows if that thing has been derailed totally or not. So I can see her definitely having the time to take on a Star Wars side trilogy. Now, what's interesting to me, though, above all this, I mean, you could also argue this is going to maybe be a Princess Leia type movie, maybe a descendant of Princess Leia and I guess Han Solo, because Princess Leia is such an important character. She's getting her own comic later this year. The first Star Wars comic, not bad. Just on a side note, I thought the coolest thing was when Darth Vader used his Star Wars telekinesis, aka the Force, to use two stormtroopers as a human shield. It was pure evil. It was surprisingly adult for a Star Wars comic, and I thought that was the best thing. And also, I liked that it was new. My biggest problem with the Star Wars comic was it was so referential to the original Star Wars. I know it's a continuation of that story in between episode, I guess 4 and 5, but still, I feel that I want new elements introduced and a feeling of moving forward. That was what plagued Superman Returns, and let's hope J.J. Abrams has it made a Superman Returns style Star Wars movie. But anyway, J.J. Abrams, that's a perfect segue, he is making a Star Wars movie with 3 female characters. So I don't understand why one of them wouldn't get the spin-off. Now, Episode 7, Star Wars Episode 7 is a crowded film. So it makes sense to say, okay, well, you might feel this character isn't getting a lot of development here in Episode 7, but they're getting their own movie. And it would also be a cue for the audience to pay particular attention to that character and make some allowances, again, for not enough character development. Being like, and you could also drop hints for the spin-off. You could be like, I wonder where that character's going, to her own movie. And I think that would be really a great way to tackle it and generate interest for this Gareth Edwards spinoff. And think about it, the actresses, well, we're not familiar with Daisey Ridley's character, but Gwendoline Christie and Lupita Nyong'o. I think audiences would be over the moon, both male and female, to see either one of those actresses get a standalone set of films with the Godzilla director. I mean, that would just be very exciting. And as for Daisey Ridley, well, Daisey Ridley plays, the rumor is, a spunky orphan. And whenever you have an orphan in this type of film, you can bet there will be a big reveal as to the parentage of said character, right? That's just kind of blockbuster mythology writing 101. So why couldn't Daisey Ridley have a spin-off series to explore her potential parentage? I just feel, perhaps the Star Wars universe is expanding too quickly with too many new characters. And again, I would prefer to see one of the 3 female characters, I don't know if they're leads, moving into this spin-off instead of introducing somebody entirely new. And also, that spin-off will then basically have to start from scratch instead of building on Episode 7. Now, the other thing is that we don't know who the leads are, but it's been rumored that it's John Boyega and Daisey Ridley in Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And that was very encouraging to see a black lead and a female lead in one of the greatest blockbuster franchises of all time. But then I think it dilutes the strength of that when you go and you do the exact same thing for the first spin-off from the series. I think it just becomes, again, as I said, diversity for the sake of diversity. And I think it takes the focus off of the storytelling. You just become, well, Star Wars is just an equal opportunity, franchise in terms of their casting, not who's the best character. And then it really does, I think that, you could argue with The Force Awakens to this point, well, John Boyega was just the best person for the role. And I think that, his character, he was just a great fit, and this is a story we want to tell. Same with Daisey Ridley. But when you go and you do it again for the spin-off, it becomes, well, before we focus on the story, our checklist is how can we get some diversity in here? And it rubs me the wrong way. And I'm supposed to be really excited about this because I'm a female audience member, right? So I'm just curious how you guys feel, both male and female audience members. Viewers, who have to pay and see these movies and are excited about it. Are you like, I can't get enough of these different kind of leads in Star Wars movies? Are you like, what are you, is this like the new Benetton Star Wars? That's just your whole thing? Just give you any cause for concern. And do you like seeing women get all these more opportunities? Or do you think that, it's not going to do women any, favors if they're stuck in a bunch of crappy action films, right? That would be my big concern. And then they can point and say, look, they don't do well. And it'd be like, well, that's because they were in crap. The old Catwoman Elektra situation all over again. We'll talk about Lucy, though, with the viewer question. Now, speaking of action franchises, let's move on to the next story, and that's with Milla Jovovich, who is announced that there's a new start date for the production for the final Resident Evil movie. Resident Evil, a final chapter. Now, I'll believe it when I see it. Maybe Milla Jovovich feels she's, run the course with these, and she doesn't want to do it anymore. But Resident Evil is a franchise at the top of its game. It's making more money than it ever has thanks to the international market. You're talking about a franchise with the last 2 entries. There's been 5 up to this point. This will be 6. There'll be 5, the first 5 films. The last 2 made over $200 million. The 4th, close to $300 million. And you're talking about a franchise where every single entry, even these later ones, made less than $70 million in the United States. So they can't even break $100 million here, but they're bringing those kind of numbers in thanks to the international audience. Also, Resident Evil has done a great job of utilizing 3D in their action films, and in a fun way, which a lot of other, they're kind of first to the party on that one. And I think that's also benefited them in the international market. But they claim this is the last one. And it's interesting because it had to be delayed considerably because Milla Jovovich was pregnant again, having another baby. And this is another, interesting dilemma with women in these big franchise roles because pregnancy comes up for them. Guys can be having a baby and it doesn't affect them, physically on set. For instance, Jamie Dornan, for 50 Shades of Grey, his wife was about to have a baby when he was cast, and I recently read that she was willing to travel to Oregon, I believe that's where they shot, to make the movie, and just had the baby there. And while she was taking care of the baby and recovering from having a child, Jamie Dornan was able to show up on set, and then when he came home at the end of the day, he had a cute new baby to play with. So it's just easier for guys to juggle these two things, building their family and building their careers. But it's harder for women because you're physically altered. And this also happened with Scarlett Johansson for Avengers 2. They had to use extensive body doubles. They had to stick Scarlett Johansson's face on them digitally. And we'll see how it affects her role in the film, and also what kind of shots are used. Expect a lot of tight angles whenever you see Scarlett Johansson's face. But so I think to Joss Whedon's credit and to the production's credit, they didn't make her role smaller, they just found a way to deal with it. And we'll see how it works in the final product. She appears to be a focus of the film, with them revealing her backstory. But Milla Jovovich, though, they pushed the start date. They had to push the start date. It'll begin shooting in August. And it'll be interesting if it does come to an end, because this has been the big, franchise with a female lead. Milla Jovovich's Resident Evil films have outlasted them all. It kind of inspired Underworld, but Underworld has only had 4 films, only 3 of them starring Kate Beckinsale. So Milla Jovovich is, an action star, I think, unequivocally. And I think that's one of the reasons her name has been used so much when they're talking about making a potential Expendables series of films, or even just one, to get Milla Jovovich in there. And she even thought about potentially, at least for a little bit, of appearing in Expendables 3 with the guys. But my big question is, do you think that she might be able to find a way to get into the comic book films? And is this something you'd want to see happen? Is she too low rent in terms of her image at this point, thanks to making these Resident Evil films? Or do you think she might do a really good job for Marvel or DC, or maybe even Fox's Marvel movies? I think she's somebody who would be on my radar as a casting director for those universes, and I think a good place to use her might be television. I would consider maybe Elektra, using her as Elektra in the Daredevil Netflix series. I think she could pull off that look, and Elektra doesn't do a lot of talking, and I think Milla Jovovich has proven to do a very good job, though, with executing her action sequences and heavy artillery. So that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story, I said we'd go behind the camera, and I wanted to talk about something that somebody said yesterday and suggested on my Selma review. I loved Selma. I gave it a fantastic review, and I said by far and away, there's a lot of talent involved there, but the big talent was Ava DuVernay. And then so Salty 1274 said, well, how about Ava DuVernay to direct Black Panther? And as soon as he said it, I was like, sold. And it's a guy recommending this. So I think that's incredibly encouraging and very exciting. And I think Ava DuVernay is a great choice. And not because she's a female director, just because she's a talented director. And I would much rather see a female director take on a male character, although he does have his female set of bodyguards. That'll be interesting. And a lot of strong women in Black Panther's family, his sister, etc. But I would much prefer that than giving the woman director the woman female character like they're doing with Michelle MacLaren over for Wonder Woman. Although I don't begrudge Michelle MacLaren, take whatever movie you can get. She wants to jump to feature films, and that's very exciting for her career. But so Ava DuVernay for Black Panther, I think it will be good for her, and it will be good for Black Panther. For her, as I said, if she wants to really build her career long term, she can't just make girly type films. And she also just can't make films that speak to the Black community. Actually, a BTT viewer spoke to that and said, Black filmmakers only seem to get recognition when they make Black, quote unquote, Black movies. And that really pigeonholes them. Antoine Fuqua, though, I think is breaking out of that. Although he has not had, his track record is so spotty, it's hard to use him as an example of success. But he's doing really well right now. And I think it'll be great to see what he does with Magnificent Seven remake for him and Denzel. But Ava DuVernay, I think, would be able to take on Black Panther, which has a larger audience because it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but at the same time, she'd still be able to, I think, clearly this is important to Ava DuVernay, speak to the Black community, to the, Black history. Because if you look at her slate of films, that's the kind of story she's interested in telling. So this would allow her to stick with her strengths and her interests, while allowing her to also expand her audience and her own horizons, and almost act like a bridge perhaps to other types of filmmaking. So I think that would be great for her. Now, I also said it would be great for Black Panther, right? And that's because I think if Black Panther is going to succeed, it needs to kind of play like a live-action comic book version of The Lion King, which has already been a a huge hit for Disney, one of their biggest hits ever, in fact. And I think it's the success of The Lion King which gives them some confidence in going into the Black Panther storyline over in the MCU, because they have a success rate in that general area. And I think, it would be wrong to not credit the success of The Lion King with Disney willing to move forward in this area in terms of diversity for the MCU. And The Lion King had a wonderful inclusion of African heritage in it. And I think that needs to be a part of the Black Panther films via Wakanda. And it could very easily go in the other direction because Wakanda is an extremely advanced civilization in terms of technology. And I think that was the downfall of the Thor films. They tried to show that Asgard had a similar situation where they were very advanced technologically as well. And I think that robbed the Thor films of a strong Norse mythology element. And I think that's what people wanted to see. I mean, when they were first going to make the Thor films, everyone was like, this will be Marvel's The Lord of the Rings. And it really has not turned out to be the case at all. I mean, look what they did to Malekith, right? And Dark Elves. They were not very elf-like at all. They seem more alien. And I think that ended up really derailing the Thor franchise and why I think it's the least popular trilogy to date. We'll see if Ragnarok can turn things around. Maybe it'll destroy all that shiny metal and they can rebuild in fun Viking-like ways, which is what everybody I think really wants to see. So again, Wakanda could go in that direction where it just becomes basically Black Tony Stark. And I don't think that's a good idea. I'm nervous about how that's going to happen, what's going to happen over in Ant-Man. I feel that, they're skewing a little too Tony Stark. And I think it's important for these characters to have very different identities, and that's what creates an interesting group dynamic, right? So that's what I'd like to see happen with Black Panther, and I feel that Ava DuVernay would make sure that element came into play, and that's why I think it would be good for Black Panther as well. But I'm curious, do you think Ava DuVernay would be a good choice for Black Panther? Do you think Black Panther needs to have a black director, just as, I said I didn't want Wonder Woman to have a female director? Maybe you feel the same way about Black Panther, but I think Ava DuVernay is just so talented. If you saw Selma, I think that even the color issue would fade away, because just from a technical standpoint, she did such a great job with the building tension, and the few action sequences are incredibly well staged and very poignant, a lot of emotion. And if she can inject that into a Black Panther movie, I think you'd have something very exciting, and also not just well done in terms of action, but something that had a good emotional hook as well. And that makes for the best movie all around, right? So I think that this is a great idea, and hopefully it'll find its way to Kevin Feige's brain. All right, so those are the three stories of the day, and let's get on to the viewer question, which kind of, it deals with women in blockbusters, but it deals with everybody in blockbusters. So we're going to widen our conversation. And this comes from Star Wars Customizer 12. And Star Wars Customizer 12 says, and by the way, a number of people seconded Star Wars Customizer 12's question, so that's why I picked it today. So he says, hello, Grace. It has been a long time since I've asked a question for Morning Movie News, but I hope you will find this one interesting. I do. I have noticed that many stars in superhero movies don't seem to be having that much luck with any other movies outside of their roles as superheroes. Robert Downey Jr.'s movie The Judge did not make that much at the box office, and Chris Hemsworth's recent movie Black Hat seems to be getting poor reviews and poor box office. Why do you think these stars can't land any other well-received roles other than superheroes? And then Star Wars Customizer has some very nice things to say about the show, saying, watched it while in class, before graduating, but now during the daily workout. So I hope you're getting a good workout today, Star Wars Customizer 12, and let's get to your question. Now, an interesting quote that I want to start off with comes from Paul Newman, who had his own box office hits and misses. And he admitted it, and he said, in just any role, I don't necessarily work out. But when you cast me in the right role, I'm priceless. And of course he was talking about salary negotiations there, but I think he was really talking to the point that actors aren't maybe quite as diverse as they think they are. Now they might be able to play that role, and they might be convincing from an aesthetic standpoint in terms of artistry, but audiences don't necessarily want to see it. A lot of times, audiences are interested in you only from a certain perspective. And that's just the hard truth of the entertainment business, especially when you're dealing with the mainstream audience. Actors try and break out of certain ruts all the time. They view them as ruts. And they often are met with a lack of success. Audiences simply don't want to see that. Harrison Ford is a great example. When he's in an action movie, everybody turns up. But then he goes and makes movies like Regarding Henry, the Mosquito, I think it was Mosquito Coast. very, even frantic. I remember seeing that, a long time ago when I was little, and I thought it was pretty good. But at the same time, not big hits, because this just isn't the way audiences are interested in seeing Harrison Ford. So this is something these actors need to accept, and there's evidence to this. Now, while the judge didn't do well, Robert Downey Jr. did quite well as Sherlock Holmes. Because again, he was kind of like Victorian Tony Stark, and that's clearly what audiences are interested in seeing him do. And he kind of played Tony Stark as a lawyer, but, it wasn't a big picture. That just, it wasn't a big action epic scale film. And that's clearly the kind of, situation that people are interested in when it comes to Robert Downey Jr. I'd also like to point out that Scarlett Johansson had a lot of luck with Lucy, because it was another action film, and the audience has come to really accept her in that kind of role. Now, she had a lot of she was very highly regarded for her work in Under the Skin, but not a big successful film. I mean, it did pretty well, I think, with the fanboy community because it had sci-fi elements, but it wasn't a big success for her, financially, because again, it wasn't something mainstream audiences were interested in seeing. But I think clearly Scarlett Johansson has been reborn as an actress in her career as an action star, and I think that's why she partially took on and was offered the Ghost in the Shell role. We'll see how that works for her if the whitewashing backfires on her, as it did with Exodus. We'll see. Didn't hurt Edge of Tomorrow, so it's a real wild card how that's going to turn out. Now, Chris Evans, whenever he tries to make romantic comedies, etc., no one's interested. And Chris Hemsworth with Black Hat, people aren't interested in seeing him. Now, I'd also say that Thor, and also I'd be interested to see how Chris Evans might do post Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That I think has raised his profile considerably, and maybe audiences might be a little more interested in seeing him. Although I think you could argue that was more Scarlett Johansson and Anthony Mackie and Samuel L. Jackson's film. Chris Hemsworth really needed a lot of support. Chris Evans really needed a lot of support on that film. And also the Thor movies don't do particularly well in the grand scheme of things, and I think they're helped considerably by Tom Hiddleston. And we'll see how Tom Hiddleston does with Skull Island. That's a great choice for him because, again, it plays into how audiences want to see him. Also, Crimson Peak. These are all films that I think play right into his target demographic and the audience he's building via Loki, right? He makes these small films like Only Lovers Left Alive with Jim Jarmusch. Nobody goes to see it because they're not interested in seeing him in that regard. Although there's an argument to be made about having to make those kind of movies anyway to make sure that the industry sees you in an intellectual capacity and that they think you're doing a lot to further your craft, etc. So anyway, Chris Hemsworth didn't do that well, but I'd like to point out to you that he did do well when he did Snow White and the Huntsman, because it was a Thor-like role, and he's supposed to be the big star for the upcoming Huntsman film, which, by the way, Emily Blunt is being courted to play the villain. I guess Charlize Theron will only appear in flashbacks, or, not as much as perhaps audiences would like, but Emily Blunt, this would be an interesting role for her. I think she's obviously getting it off of her success in The Edge of Tomorrow. So Chris Hemsworth, people want to see him in Thor-type roles. So I just think that's, it's just an interesting truth, as I said, that, audiences only like seeing actors in specific ways, and it's very hard to break out of that. Again, it's an interesting contrast because actors see themselves as chameleons. Oh, I can play anything. But the nature of audiences is that they only really want to see them in one type of role. Consider, for instance, even Sigourney Weaver. Any really big movie star really only played one type of role throughout their career. And that's just how people fell in love with them, and that's how they wanted to see them. It's very rare. It's happened, and I'm sure some of you will come up with some examples, but it's very rare for an actor to break away from that persona that makes them a movie star. All right, thank you so much for your question, Star Wars Customizer. Again, enjoy the rest of your workout. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, the viewer question, and anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Bye.